Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the middle of the week. You've not quite made it as far as you want to be yet. This has been another week in politics, with each day feeling like its own week. We do have a full ticket, and we're going to be talking a lot more about the new roadshow, Harris-Walz, with some interesting political minds coming up over the course of the next hour. Here's what we can tell you. They're crisscrossing in the Midwest. Harris and Walz in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, an event a couple of hours from now. They're going to be introduced by a dairy and grain farmer as they try to keep it real. No word yet if Tim Walz is going to be wearing camo. This evening, they go on to Detroit. There's a campaign event there, 7 o'clock. A first-time voter will introduce them. All the while, J.D. Vance, hot on their heels, matching the travel, as we told you. Already started, first in Detroit, like I said, crisscrossing. He was in Shelby Township, Michigan, then on the way to eastern Eau Claire later on, right around the time that Harris and Walz will be there. So the dueling road shows continue here. After the big moment last evening, were you with us? Special extended edition of Balance of Power. We thought it would never end. But of course, in a moment like this, why would we ever stop? Kamala Harris in Philadelphia. The big preamble, boy, was a who's who of politicians, Democrats from Pennsylvania. We saw Josh Shapiro bringing the crowd to its feet, Senator Bob Casey, even John Fetterman. I wonder if he met backstage at all with Josh Shapiro. And then the vice president herself, Kamala Harris, walks out with Tim Walz, who had his big moment in a crowd that was lapping it up. Here is the governor from Minnesota on his first day on the ticket.
Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends.
You can take my word for it. He got the crowd in a lather. Now, we spent a lot of time yesterday. Talked to Brad Howard. We talked to a number of Democratic strategists about this moment for the party, the way Democrats would be framing this new entrant to the race. And we want to get a better sense of the Republican messaging that we're seeing now. And as we've heard, dangerously liberal is how the Trump campaign is billing Tim Walz, along with, of course, Kamala Harris. But this is still evolving. And we're joined now by Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from none other than Pennsylvania. He has a very good sense of the conversation that's going on right here, as also senior advisor of our Republican legacy. Charlie, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. Thanks for joining us. Is Tim Walz dangerously liberal?
No, I probably wouldn't describe him that way. I know Tim Walz. I know him well. I served with him. We traveled to Afghanistan together as members of Congress, Afghanistan and Iraq. He was very committed to veterans issues, defense issues, certainly agriculture. He represented a more, I'll say, a slight lean Republican district. So he was fairly moderate as a member of the House. I think he's a bit more progressive as a governor. I think it's fair to say that Tim Walz is certainly more progressive than Josh Shapiro and Mark Kelly, but he's not a wild-eyed progressive either. Like Ilhan Omar and some of the others that you could think about. But so that's my quick take on it. And I think that in many respects, Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief that Kamala Harris did not select Josh Shapiro for a variety of reasons.
Well, that's interesting. Donald Trump this morning on Fox and Friends says he was delighted to learn that it's Tim Walz fulfilling the scenario that you're outlining here. Does Tim Walz actually make the job easier, or are we just giving way too much credit to the running mate on both sides?
Well, I think what you said is true, that most people really don't base their votes for president on the vice presidential selection. Tim Walz does no harm to the Democrats. And I think he'll probably be an effective attack dog for Kamala Harris. But does he really bring any additional votes to Pennsylvania? No, he doesn't. It doesn't bring any votes to Kamala Harris, as far as I can tell. Shapiro, of course, would have been a much more formidable opponent for Trump and Vance in Pennsylvania, because on the margins, I think Shapiro could have helped Harris considerably in the Philadelphia media market and on the margins. And this game is going to be won or lost on the margins. And so that's why I think Republicans are relieved because Shapiro had a more centrist view of the world. And what's remarkable is, too, all the attacks against Josh Shapiro were coming from the far left. All they were doing was centering him and, frankly, her. But she chose not to. And plus, of course, Kamala Harris came out for a fracking ban in 2020, which is not going to help her, particularly in western Pennsylvania and other parts of northern Pennsylvania. Where natural gas is such a big part of the economy. And, of course, Pennsylvania is the second largest natural gas producing state in the nation after Texas. So Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief, but I don't think Vance or Walz are going to make a determination on the outcome of this election. It's all about Donald Trump and it's all about Kamala Harris at this point.
Yeah, fascinating. She did change her position on the fracking thing. I don't know if that matters or if anyone's listening in Pennsylvania, but give us a sense of what your home state is thinking here. Because part of the Democratic narrative yesterday, Congressman, was that Tim Walz might not be from Pennsylvania. He might not be able to deliver the electoral votes, but he can speak to Pennsylvania. That it's the personality, the character, the tone that will carry the ticket straight across the Rust Belt. Do you buy that?
Well, I think they may want to try to deploy Tim Walz in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It may be in some areas where Democrats struggle, and thinking that he might be able to help them cut down on the margins. But as I said, I just don't think that the second fiddle is really going to determine the votes. I mean, Republicans are going to relentlessly attack this ticket of Harris-Walz as being too liberal. They'll certainly go after Tim Walz on Minneapolis burning in 2020. But sure, they're going to try to deploy Tim Walz in areas that where Democrats may struggle a bit and they think they can cut down on the margins. I don't know how successful they will be. If you look at the map of Minnesota, where Tim Walz, how he performed in 2022, he and Joe Biden, I think, performed about the same in the same they won the same counties. And I keep looking back at Pennsylvania, and I look at Josh Shapiro won a lot of counties that Donald Trump did. And that's where I kept looking at this. Oh, this is all about crossover voters. So in my ruthlessly pragmatic political mind, I'm thinking, well, why would you just select a guy who can help you deliver the state that you must win? Pennsylvania is the whole ballgame for Kamala Harris. If she loses Pennsylvania, she loses the election. So I thought, oh, Shapiro's easy because he had a lot of crossover appeal. A lot of Trump voters voted for Shapiro. So I thought this was a pretty straightforward case, but that's not where we are. And I just don't think, like I said, Walz does no harm. He's a decent, he's an honorable man. He'll be an effective attacker for Harris. But I just don't see where he brings the additional votes that Harris didn't already have. Sure. It's like Vance really doesn't bring any. Vance doesn't bring anything either that Trump didn't already have. In fact, you can make a case that Vance is probably a bit of a liability to Trump at this point.
That's been the narrative recently as well. I'm just compelled by the two characterizations that we're seeing here. Maybe you can help me rationalize them. You know what Democrats say? He's a coach, right? He was a teacher, Army National Guardsman, became a congressman, rural. He's a hunter, right? We heard a lot about that yesterday. He's a sportsman. What we're hearing from Republicans is he turned his state into a trans refuge, that Minnesota was a sanctuary state for immigrants, that he wanted to give illegals driver's licenses. And by the way, while he's at it, the campaign manager for Donald Trump, Chris LaCivita, is now fanning the flames that he bailed on his military service, almost like a swift boat kind of a routine. Is any of that real? Should Democrats be acknowledging this?
Well, I think the attack on his service record is a fool's errand. I mean, he served honorably in the National Guard. They should leave it alone and thank him for his service. Look, if the Trump campaign has been fairly disciplined this time out of the gate, of course, Donald Trump is not very disciplined, and he runs off on tangents. And I think the Trump campaign would be well served to keep this election focused on the issues on inflation, on the border, and even on crime. I think they can make a strong case against the Democrats. I don't think they need to get into these kinds of personal attacks. I mean, I saw some something that suggests they were going to attack him on abortion. Oh, well, okay. Well, guess what? Walz and the Democrats are in a better place on abortion than the Republicans are. So I'm not sure that's an effective attack. Again, I'm not so sure that these attacks on transgendered people are really going to be that effective either. I think they're much better talking about the economy, inflation, the border, and crime. But they need to be disciplined about it. Going off on these tangents and making wild accusations, criticizing his service record, and going after Kamala Harris and saying she turned black. It's just, this is absurd, and it's actually very damaging to the Republican effort. I think that's what
Charlie
most Republicans would.
It's great to have you back, sir, with The View from Pennsylvania, former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
A lot of people. I hear a lot of people are making a habit of it. Donald Trump's been hearing things too, casting about on Truth Social. As we were preparing to hear from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz last night, he writes, what are the chances? It's got anything that starts with what are the chances has got to be good. That crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the U.S., whose presidency was unconstitutionally stolen from him by, is it Kamabla he's calling? I don't even know what that is anymore. He's Kamabla? All right, fast forward. What are the chances he crashes the Democrat National Convention, he writes, and tries to take back the nomination, beginning with challenging me to another debate? I wonder what was for dinner last night or for lunch at Mar-a-Lago. Lisa Camooso Miller is with us. I want her impression on this new ticket and exactly what's going to happen with the chances of a debate. Not with Joe Biden, but with Kamala Harris. Lisa, are you hearing this too?
Hi,
Joe Biden
Joe.
wants back in? Hi.
No, I'm not. I think that that's a lot of wish casting on the side of the former president. I think he's wishing that maybe he could go back to the original ticket that he had to debate, because I think that he's in for a bit of a challenge when it comes to standing next to Kamala Harris on that debate stage.
Well, what are you thinking about the new ticket? We haven't had a chance to talk it out since certainly they appeared in public, or since it was just, my God, that was just yesterday? Oh, my God, it was announced yesterday.
We've aged
I was
so
going to
much
say it
in
like a week
just
ago.
12 hours.
Yeah. All right. So you've seen them in concept on paper. Now you've seen them on stage as well. And that was quite a rally for these two last night, the biggest crowd they've seen yet. Lisa, a lot of folks thought this was going to be Josh Shapiro. What do you make of the pick?
If you'd asked me yesterday morning, I might have said that I thought that it was a bit of a ho-hum announcement. But boy, I watched that event yesterday with her announcement and announcing Governor Walz, and I was surprised and impressed with his approach. I felt like he really spoke to some of the issues that people are looking for guidance on, that are really looking for leadership on. And as much as I'm talking to my friends on the Republican side, I'm talking to a lot of political people in general that are starting to point out that perhaps that this has now become a race between the two bases. Because the issues, as much as Governor Walz really does have a point of view that sounds a lot like a Republican in some ways and manner, he also has been very much in favor of some progressive points of view that I think that the Republican ticket will now take and turn in a way to try to separate the two tickets in a base versus base contest. And I think that that's what we're going to see over the course of the next 90 days.
All right. This is really important. This is why we wanted Lisa to join us here, because you can paint him. I've heard this all over the last 24 hours in some part right here at this desk, Lisa, that he's a moderate, or you can paint him as a dangerous liberal, another progressive, as we're hearing from Donald Trump. And there's quite a lineup here, right? Look at his record as governor. Minnesota, sanctuary state, a trans refuge, according to the AP. Menstrual sanitation products available in boys' bathrooms, illegals getting driver's licenses. This makes a hell of a campaign ad, Lisa. That's what we're going to hear for the next couple of months.
Yes, and we've known this, Joe. You and I've talked about this a dozen times before. This is going to be the nastiest race, even more nasty now because the fight really comes down to that fight for the middle, that fight for who gets that coveted center right and center left voting block. And it's become so much more narrow than ever before. And so that just means that the base will definitely be with Harris, maybe more so than folks that were going to be with Joe Biden because they were concerned about his ability to lead at this late state in his life. But also, too, now the base is firmly behind Donald Trump and JD Vance. And this too, Joe, what I've said now over the course of the last couple of hours to folks is it becomes a popularity contest. Who is more likable and who is more perceived as the one who can work across the aisle to get things done? Because people, regardless of where they feel about progressive issues or conservative issues, in the middle is where the race will be won, and it'll be a race over a very, very narrow margin. And that's the one where folks can say who can work across the aisles, who can get the job done, and who also really brings the temperature back down in the US, because the temperature in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the fighting, the vitriol is really so high that people are just exhausted and they're looking for some reprieve. And after watching last night, right now, if the race were between the two in a popularity contest in terms of who's more likable, it sure looks like the Democratic ticket is going to win over the Republican ticket if that were the foundation of what the folks are looking to vote for.
The Center for Effective Lawmaking ranked him the number seven most bipartisan member of the House during his final year in Congress. To your point, Lisa, but we're going to be hearing a lot about swift voting. And I'm curious where you see this going. Chris LaCivita, the co-campaign manager for Donald Trump, has been fanning the flames on this, and he knows a little bit about it, having done this to John Kerry. Remember Swift Boat Veterans for Truth?
Oh, sure do.
They're talking about how Tim Walz, quote unquote, bailed on his military service, that he quit the National Guard in 2005 to run for governor on the eve, essentially, of his being called up to deploy to Iraq. Is that a fair line of attack? Will we hear more about it?
Isn't that, Joe, not to interrupt, but isn't that rich? Because I know a lot of folks that served in Vietnam that are happy to talk about how Donald Trump was a draft dodger. So I don't think we have a lot of room to wiggle on this side. I don't think that that's one that's going to be a winnable point of view. They can talk about that swift boat all day long, but the truth is that he is a veteran and he has served in a way that the ticket on the Republican side has not. And that to me is a very tricky slope to go down, and it's one that I think will not necessarily work in their favor, because there are a lot of veterans that really feel like Donald Trump was not necessarily honest about his own ability to serve when time came for him to do that.
Yeah. Picking through the talking points here with the person who used to run communications at the RNC. I want to ask you about this debate because everyone is looking forward to it happening. Until this morning, didn't really think it would. But Donald Trump got on Fox and Friends. You know, he gets on the phone. They let him go for like a half an hour. Well, it sure sounds like there's going to be a debate now. Listen to what he said.
I don't know how she debates. I heard she's sort of a nasty person, but not a good good debater, but we'll see, because we'll be debating her, I guess, in the pretty near future. It's going to be announced fairly soon, but we'll be debating her. I'd like to see it on Fox, by the way.
When he was asked what about ABC, he did the whole Slopalopoulos thing and insulted everybody there, but said, hey, takes two to tango. Sounds like the former president believes he needs to debate Kamala Harris, Lisa. What do you think?
You know, I'll believe it when I see it, Joe. I think anybody in that camp would know that she is a very skilled debater. She was a litigator. She was an attorney general. She did very well in the debates, even on the Democratic side. She has been coached, and she herself is very disciplined in the way that she responds and reacts. The last time we saw Donald Trump on stage, he was very much offensive to everyone in the audience. And I suspect that unless they're very careful about the way he debates a woman, it's really going to be one of those things that will be jarring and very much not helpful to his campaign. Calling a female nasty is just plain wrong, and just plain, it smacks in the face of the way that Donald Trump has carefully and not so carefully conducted himself when he's in a debate with someone that doesn't look exactly like him. And that, I think, is one that he absolutely needs to be very careful about. In his campaign, I'm sure with the talent that's in that room, they are doing the same. They are very cautious and very thoughtful about how that's going to look.
I'll be very curious to hear the nickname that he settles on for Tim Walz. Big picture, Lisa, with your Republican hat on, does this not make it easier for the Trump-Vance ticket than it would have been with Josh Shapiro as a running mate?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think Governor Shapiro definitely was a pick that folks thought was one that made good political sense. I'm sure that the friends of mine who are in the polling world would tell me that it doesn't necessarily make a difference. But I do think, though, the fact that Governor Walz has this credibility in middle America and has definitely got the bona fides. The debate to me that is going to be most interesting to watch is the one that we're going to see between the two vice presidential candidates. So as much as I like to think that this pick is one that gives a little bit more of an advantage to the Republican ticket than one with Governor Shapiro, I also think that 90 days, as much as you and I know, could go very quickly. It's also the kind of thing that a lot of mischief and a lot of pitfalls are before us before we get done.
Just think of what we're going to go through together for the next 90 days. Let's see if there is a vice presidential debate. I sure hope so, Lisa. It's great to have you back. Lisa Camooso Miller with an extended conversation. I was looking forward to that. Former RNC communications director and, of course, host of the Friday Reporter podcast and a dear friend of the program.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Kailey, Leinz, and Mathieu in Washington, and the newly minted Democratic ticket on the road somewhere in the skies on the way to Wisconsin and, of course, later Michigan today. But yesterday, they launched the Harris-Walz campaign officially in Philadelphia at a rally at Temple University, which drew some 10,000 people. We brought coverage of that for you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. You could hear often the exuberance in the room as both the current Vice President Kamala Harris and the man that she would like to serve as her Vice President Tim Walz spoke. Here's a little taste of what Harris told the assembled crowd.
We got some work to do. We need to move to the general election and win that. And to all the friends, listen, we also need to level set. We are the underdogs in this race. But we have the momentum, and I know exactly what we are up against.
Kamala Harris with her new running mate at her side in Philadelphia late yesterday. As Kailey mentioned, we brought you special coverage of what turned out to be a pretty long event there for the two and the grand unveiling. And that's where we start our conversation right now with Hadriana Lowenkron, reporting on the campaign for Bloomberg, has endured many of these rallies and has many more booked. Hadriana, it's great to see you. When we consider, I hate to do this every time you come in here, but the amount of stuff that has happened and that you've witnessed firsthand, and I guess the last 3 weeks now since the attempted assassination, is just remarkable. It's going to take us a long time, I feel like, to unpack this, to rebuild it in our heads and really figure out what happened. But you're tasked with writing the first draft of history here. And you've got a new campaign that is bringing an enormous amount of enthusiasm that I'm guessing you were not seeing at Joe Biden events before.
Absolutely. I mean, I was at the Harris rally. It was the first one since she had gotten the pledged number of delegates to be the presumptive Democratic nominee. And the atmosphere was definitely different. Everyone is saying the vibe is shifting. That's apparently the terms we're using. But essentially, you know, and I speak to voters everywhere I go, whether it's Trump, it's Biden, it's Harris. And these are people who are now excited because it's not just they're voting against someone, it's they're voting for someone. And this is something that I think even everyone was kind of wondering about. Would the Democratic Party coalesce behind one person? Would there be more division until we finally get maybe even all the way up to the convention? And so having someone that the party is rallying around, having now a new VP whom the party is rallying around, you're definitely feeling that in the air.
Well, but there's something to be said about a honeymoon period or a sugar rush, if you will. Hadriana, this is all incredibly new. We're talking a campaign that's just over 2 weeks old. How do they sustain this momentum? What's the plan?
Absolutely. And as you said, It's a great honeymoon. Let's just start with that. I mean, they're bringing in a lot. I think it's now $36 million or something since Walz was on the ticket. Even before that, the fundraising has eclipsed Trump, where before we saw what was an advantage for Biden. Actually, now the Trump campaign was going beyond that. Now we're seeing the tables turn and the polling turns. But I think what's important now is it's not just the money that's coming in, but it's really looking at the map. And so having Harris now at the top of the ticket, having Walz, who brings in kind of the Midwestern appeal, there are way more states in play. And so, again, we're looking at these swing states, both, Vance on the Trump campaign and Harris. They're going on these swing state tours, and we're really going to see how they're able to appeal to all of the different voters here.
What's Donald Trump's schedule look like right now? Because I find it interesting that you've got Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. You've got the full ticket going to Eau Claire today, going to Detroit today. J.D. Vance is doing a solo tour across the Midwest right now. Without the top of the ticket with him. Doesn't everyone want to see Donald Trump? What's that all about?
Right. I mean, Trump is definitely down a bit this week. I'm going to be with him in Montana on Friday, which is not the most traditional place that you would think, but there is, of course, a competitive congressional race going on there, and we'll likely see him touch on that. But I think he's kind of giving Vance this opportunity to shine. I think also the way it kind of lines up with Walz, being introduced to the Democratic ticket. Now the attention is kind of on both of them. And usually, I have people telling me, VPs don't really have too much of an impact. But I think everyone is still looking at them. They kind of know Trump already. They know Harris in the sense of they know her as VP. Obviously, she has to figure out how she's going to separate from Biden, or the opposite of that. There's kind of a tricky balance there. But in terms of these two VPs, they're relatively new generally to the public. And so this is kind of their chance. And there's definitely a test. We know Vance has come under fire for some comments as of late. We may see the same with Walz. Things may be, come up. This is the time this is their introduction, let's say.
Well, it's not just J.D. Vance who has come under fire for comments. You were at the NABJ conference where Donald Trump openly questioned Harris's racial identity and was very combative with the journalists who were moderating him at that event. There has been, throughout this campaign, this narrative that the Trump campaign is more disciplined this time. The campaign, though, is one thing. The candidate is something else. Is there a sense that Donald Trump is going to get more disciplined with the messaging?
That's a good question. I think we definitely saw a bit more discipline. I'm thinking specifically in the wake of all of the fury over Biden and the age and whether he should step down. He was kind of quiet. He actually was pretty disciplined then. We didn't really hear from him. He kind of let Biden have all of the negative news coverage. But now we're seeing things change. We're seeing Harris come up. There's a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of the earned media is going towards her. And I think he is now kind of back in the situation where he's trying to go on the offense. And so he's been testing out a bunch of different things. As you know, NABJ is an example of something that did it stick? Maybe not. Did it help kind of bring in the black voters that he needs? Maybe not. And so we're going to continue to see, obviously, some of the cities that Vance was in Philadelphia too. Trump had been to Philadelphia. These are cities that they need. They need the black population. But again, you have Harris. Harris was just in Atlanta. She's bringing in the goods, as you may say, with Meg Thee Stallion and all of these other rappers. In Philly, there was a DJ. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of just the juxtaposition between the two and who they're trying to attract.
And of course, you'll be there to cover it all for us. Hadriana Lowenkron, busy girl for Bloomberg these days. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us. And as we assess, actually, to Hadriana's point, what impact, if at all, a vice presidential selection in Governor Walz actually will have on this campaign, we turn now to Charlie Cook. He, of course, is founder and contributor to the Cook Political Report. Charlie, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's always good to have you. We made a very big deal about this yesterday. Obviously, there was quite an introduction of Walz as the vice presidential candidate last night. Does it really change the race meaningfully?
I don't think so. There are all these cliches that are fundamentally right, that people vote for president, not vice president, and that running mates can hurt more than they can help. And I think people put way too much emphasis on delivering a state. I think in 2024, nobody's delivering anybody. And, even historically, at most a point or two in a home state, and that's not necessary. That's not really provable. So I don't think it's going to make a big difference in that sense. But I do think he will. I think Walz is going to line up really well with Vance in a debate. And I think he projects. It's interesting that he does two almost contradictory things. one thing is he comes across so heartland and grew up in a farm in Nebraska, Minnesota, all this. And at the same time, the real progressives in the Democratic Party really like him. And it sort of frees up Harris to try to stay more towards the center than she might have to if she were having to like put out fires on her left. And that raises one other point, is that the fact that Democrats got a fresh nominee without having to do a primary, a nomination fight that would pull all their candidates over to the left and way away from swing voters, from undecided voters. I think that's a plus. But this is still, this is going to be a really, really competitive race.
Really interesting, Charlie, because we're hearing everything about Tim Walz. He's everything. He runs a sanctuary state. He's pro-trans. I keep hearing he's giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Some say that he's a populist economist. But then I heard last night in Philadelphia, he's a coach. It's Coach Walz. He's a teacher. He's an Army National Guardsman. Which identity emerges here?
Well, it probably depends on the eye of the beholder, who's looking. But the thing is, he does have some very, very progressive liberal policies, but he comes across in a more reassuring and not a threatening way. And, in politics, as you guys know, perception is a heck of a lot more important than reality. And he seems to have a good bedside manner, if you will. And I think it was kind of a very interesting pick. I didn't really expect it, but people that have worked closely with him, other governors I've talked to, House members, and to be honest, this guy who served 6 terms in the House, sort of under the radar screen, not a flashy guy, not a self-promoter, but the people that have worked with him closely, they seem to think very highly of him.
Well, not everyone thinks highly of him or highly of the choice, Charlie. There is a narrative ongoing that is being encouraged by the Republican ticket. Donald Trump was talking about this on Fox and Friends this morning. This notion that the selection of Walz over Governor Josh Shapiro, a Jewish man, was an anti-Semitic one. Keeping in mind here that the vice president is married also to a Jewish man, the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. Is that a message that will resonate with anyone who is not already part of the Trump base?
I don't think that's much of a. I mean, heck, did former President Trump picking J.D. Vance and not someone who is Jewish, was that anti-Semitic? No, I think that's kind of, anybody who believes that is going to want to believe that and will believe anything else. I mean, the thing is, I think the race has changed in that, Biden is out of the way, age, health, all that out of the way. But fundamentals are still there. The map is still hard. It still tilts more Republican than Democrat, with sort of, Republican. We've talked about this before. Republican votes being more efficiently allocated around the country, and the cost of living, economic anxiety, border, which were real problems for Biden, those have conveyed over. And it may not be 1-to-1, but it's, 0.9 to 1. I mean, it's very, very close. And those are still problems that she's going to have to deal with. But I think the pick was, it was a solid pick. And I don't think it'll affect the outcome of the election, but it will make for an interesting vice presidential debate. That's for sure.
God, let's see if we get one. Enter the incumbent, Charlie Cook. Political reporting today that aides to Biden and Harris are considering plans to bring him back onto the campaign trail and appear with her. Is that smart, or should Kamala Harris try to stay as far away from Joe Biden for the balance of this campaign?
Oh, I don't think it will. I mean, the thing is that Biden, yes, the Biden administration there was a reason why he dropped 14 percentage points in his Gallup job approval rating between July and October of 2021. And a lot of it was inflation, all that stuff. But at the same time, ultimately, what pushed Biden out of the race was perception that, look, this guy's too old to serve effectively for 4 more years. And I think a lot of voters, to be honest, back in 2020, it was never explicitly said, but they thought this was going to be one and done, that Biden would serve 1 term and move on. And and it was never promised. He didn't break a promise, but it was sort of implied, and probably would have been a good idea, to stick with that. But, so I don't think her campaigning, I don't think Harris can. First of all, if she didn't campaign with him some, it would look terrible. It would look awful. So I think doing it some makes a whole lot of sense. But his job, he's going to be sticking to his day job, being president, till January 20th.
Well, as we consider Joe Biden, Charlie, you, of course, in the aftermath of the debate, were on this program talking about how it was already going to be hard for him to win. Now the path had gotten that much smaller. He seems to have ultimately recognized that as well. When you're looking now at the path for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, both of them, whose is easier right now? Or is this simply too close to call at this stage?
Well, to me, the fundamentals still favor Trump, that is, map and the issue agenda. But, Donald Trump has always been somewhat erratic. I think the last 4 or 5 months, he's been more so. And he seems genuinely rattled since Biden dropped out of the race. And, I'm sort of, there's a side of me that thinks that Harris can't win, but Trump can lose. And that if Trump loses, it's going to be him beating himself. And it is kind of interesting that, around Donald Trump and when he was president, it was like total chaos. But there's a sense from the public that the country was doing okay. And during the Biden administration, while he personally isn't a chaotic person, but things in the country and things around the world were increasingly chaotic and seemed out of control. And I think that's one thing that's just sort of working back towards Trump, is that they look back and see his administration, the country, they think swing voters think the country did better under Trump. And so they assume that it probably would again. And they're even willing to put up.
Come back and talk to us when we have more time, Charlie. It's great to have you on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
It's been quite a turnaround we've seen in the presidential race as well, as we've kept track of here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We've had a series of questions. The first a few weeks ago was whether or not Joe Biden was going to stay in the race. We got that answer. Would he endorse someone else? We got that answer too. Now Kamala Harris is officially the Democratic nominee. Then we wondered who would join her on the ticket. We learned yesterday that it's Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. We still have one question out there, though, and that is, will we see Kamala Harris share a debate stage with Donald Trump before the election? Remember, she wanted to debate on ABC on September 10th. He's pitching September 4th on Fox, but he had this to say on Fox and Friends this morning.
I don't know how she debates. I heard she's sort of a nasty person, but not a good debater. But we'll see, because we'll be debating her, I guess, in the pretty near future. It's going to be announced fairly soon, but we'll be debating her. I'd like to see it on Fox, by the way.
I'm still exhausted from Kailey Leinz wind-up into that moment earlier today on Fox and Friends. So are we going to debate? How about the vice presidential candidates? Let's assemble our panel. Rick Davis is here, of course, Republican strategist, Bloomberg politics contributor and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Jonae Wartel, Democratic strategist and partner at ARC Initiatives. Great to see you both. Rick, I don't know where we're going to go on this. You and I and Kailey and everyone have been talking for months and months about whether you should allow even a candidate on a stage with Donald Trump. Did Joe Biden learn the lesson for Kamala Harris in this case? Because it sounds like this might actually happen.
Yeah, it does sound like it might happen. I would have expected Donald Trump to reject the debate, but because I know, his folks are all concerned by his debate performance. They feel like they dodged the bullet because even though he did a poor job in the debate, that's nothing compared to the suicide pact that Joe Biden had going into that debate. So I guess they feel under some pressure. They want the media narrative to be kind to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in that interview that you played, was going on and on about how the networks just absolutely love him and are dying to have him on. And so the fanning of the narcissistic flame, is so important to Donald Trump that not saying yes to a network invitation would be a defeat to his ego. So, I guess there's going to be a debate, and it sounds like maybe sooner than later, split the difference. I mean, these negotiations go on and on like this, but at least we're going to have something to do in early September, it sounds like, and it could actually have a bearing on the outcome of the campaign. So we've seen all kinds of major events lately, and it doesn't sound like we're done with them.
Well, on this idea of it having an actual bearing on the campaign, if we're running with this idea, Jonae, that this is going to happen at some point before voters have actually cast their vote, is it more likely, I just wonder what the risk reward is here for each candidate. Is it more likely that it could convince someone to vote for Kamala Harris or Trump, or that instead it could convince voters not to vote for them, but not necessarily to vote for the other, if you follow?
Yeah, so we just have to look at the past debate. When Joe Biden took the stage next to Donald Trump, we saw a tremendous amount of viewer engagement, a record number of viewers tuned into that debate. And I think the reason was because they wanted to see this contrast on full display. They wanted to see kind of this Donald Trump, Joe Biden matchup. And so I think in the same way, given all of the energy that's been surrounding this election, all of the twists and turns that we've seen, I think people are eager to see them standing right next to each other on a debate stage. So I think you're going to have a lot of folks tuning in, not just members of each of their bases, but also voters who are undecided, right? Voters who haven't really gotten to know Vice President Harris in the way that they may know Donald Trump or the way they might have known Joe Biden. They want to really see and hear from her and really be able to put that contrast into context on a debate stage. So I think this absolutely helps Vice President Harris. We know she's a skilled debater. We know that, she's even kind of provoked Donald Trump with the line, if you have something to say it to my face. But I also think she's ready and up to the challenge, whereas I think Donald Trump will regress to the name calling that he's often known for. We've seen his line of attack on her, and I think it will really make him look very small and very unpresidential.
Well, on the say it to my face part, it is worth pointing out that we heard that line not from Kamala Harris, but from Nikki Haley back in February when she was still competing against Trump in the Republican primary, and he refused to debate her or anyone else for that matter, Joe.
How true. You wonder as well if we're going to be talking about a vice presidential debate here. All this stuff has yet to come together. This is just the latest drip that we have from Donald Trump. And of course, Kailey, that could change the next time he decides to do an interview. I'd like to ask you both about what happened on primary night. This is pretty interesting. Less about the outcome of the races, more about the wait for results in Michigan specifically. Bringing us back to 2022, 538 wrote this up, Rick. A technical change in how votes are reported meant that Wayne County, Michigan took days to report its votes, and we might have a repeat performance here. Less than 1% of the expected vote had been reported in the primary for the 13th congressional district more than 2 hours after polls closed last night. Are you concerned about this, Rick? How worried should we be about delayed results adding to the noise and a lot of confusion in November?
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about it. I've never quite understood why there isn't more uniformity in reporting procedures. States all, I get it, make their decisions based on state law and the appropriate use of the ballot box in those places. But the reality is, haven't we learned the lesson that the sooner we can get these reports out, the better? States aren't consistent when it comes to, for instance, mail-in ballots. Some states have a vast majority of their votes as early voting mail-in ballots, and some don't count them before Election Day, and others do. And why in the world wouldn't you count mail-in ballots before Election Day and then have your responses ready to go in a timely manner?
Yeah.
I think the American public deserves some transparency there. I think they deserve to know who wins and who loses. I think that's the obligation of these state election officials to create better transparency in the reporting process. And as we have seen, the lack of early reporting results in every conspiracy theory known to man and undermines the integrity of an American election. So, get with it, guys. If you haven't gotten the memo yet, get it. People want to know what happens when they cast their vote, and they want to know in a timely manner.
Yeah, and on behalf of journalists, we'd like to know in a timely manner as well. Say this with self-interest. But as we look to the primaries yesterday, it wasn't just what happened in Michigan, but also in the state of Missouri, Jonae, where incumbent Congresswoman and member of the squad, Cori Bush, went down in her primary, the second squad member to lose after Jamal Bowman lost his primary race in New York earlier this year. A lot of AIPAC money, of course, was thrown into that race, given her stance when it comes to Israel and the conflict in Gaza. Is that really what is to blame here? And does that make it a translatable pattern into the general election for other candidates that may find themselves on the wrong side of the line? What do you attribute her loss to?
Well, I think in any election where you have a tremendous infusion of money behind negative messaging, that's going to be influential, right? And that's not about this isolated election. It's about any election. And so whenever you see an infusion of money, such as what AIPAC dumped into this race, you're going to see that there's going to be a driving message that's going to alienate some voters and is going to galvanize other voters. And I think that's what you saw here in this race in Missouri, but also what you saw with Jamal Bowman's race. Getting voters to focus on a singular issue, despite other issues being important for elections of members of Congress. You're going to be able to have a tremendous impact on the election. And I think that when you look at this primary race, I think you see that the spending, the messaging, it was kind of a perfect storm for there to be kind of some backlash against Representative Bush.
Well, millions spent by AIPAC in the primary here against Bush, and the same in New York against Bowman. Rick, what role will AIPAC play in the general election?
I think that they've done their damage on the members who they felt were needlessly negative toward Israel. Their job is to help support Israel and their support in the United States. So I think most of that is done. I would be surprised if they get involved in the general election at the presidential level. So they may pick a few winners and back people in the congressional level. They will start to look at whether or not it's better to have a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress. And part of that construct is, who do they think is going to be president? Do you want a divided government? So I think the real impact they have and has been felt and been wildly successful is weeding out some of these folks who they felt were really antagonists to the Israeli cause.
All right. Rick Davis, Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, together today with Janelle Wartel, Democratic strategist and partner at ARC Initiatives, our political panel. We appreciate it. Thank you both so much.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Now, as we consider the jobs market, we want to talk about labor specifically, especially when it comes to unionized labor. As the Vice President Kamala Harris is getting ready with her now running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, to travel from Wisconsin, where they are currently, to Detroit, Michigan later today to appear alongside UAW President Shawn Fain at a rally in Detroit. This, of course, comes after the selection of Walz was widely praised by Fain and other major labor organizations, as he is someone who is seen as very labor friendly. We want to dig into that a little bit deeper now and bring in Sharon Block. She is professor of practice at Harvard Law School, where she's executive director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy. She's also a former labor advisor in the Biden White House. Sharon, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about how labor friendly Governor Walz really is. Is he more so than Kamala Harris, being part of this Biden administration that claims it is the most union friendly of all time, in a more material way, or are they just singing the same tune on this?
I think that's a great competition to have. I think they both have incredibly strong records for labor. I mean, again, you have Vice President Harris, who has been part of what I think is generally accepted to be the most pro-labor administration ever, or at the very least in generations. I think they've shown that leadership often in very similar ways. Going to Detroit, you have to think about Both of them have been very strong supporters for the UAW. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris, and then Governor Walz. You have Vice President Harris really showing leadership within the administration on sort of all issues labor, as she did chair the task force on collective bargaining and worker empowerment. But she's also been a really clear leader on looking out for the rights and protecting domestic workers, care workers. I mean, her time in the Senate, she was very much looked to as a leader in the care economy labor issues. And then you have Governor Walz in his state doing some really remarkable advancements in policy for working people. So I think they both got very strong records. They have shown that sometimes in similar ways and sometimes in slightly different ways.
Well, they're certainly lining up, Sharon. It's not just the UAW, it's the AFL-CIO. AFSCME says it's a big fan of Tim Walz. NEA likes the pick, the AFT. I could keep going down the list here, but of course, the leadership of the union movement is one thing. Remembering that about a third of the membership of the UAW voted for Donald Trump last time. Who's going to vote for Harris-Walz?
So, I think you see in Governor Walz, I mean, he is a union member, right? He spent a fair bit of his adult life as a union member, as a teacher, a public school teacher. So I think that's really going to resonate with union members. But also, we're in a very different place now in this election. Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, they have a record now. And if you look at the record of the Trump administration last time on labor issues, I think this is going to be a very different picture for union members when they go to the polls to make their decision.
Well, what we've heard from not just Donald Trump, but also his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, he has talked a lot about the working man, but he adds in the detail of union or non-union frequently. How should we be thinking about that idea, Sharon? What does that actually mean to you?
I think what that means to me what it should mean is building a working class, a middle class, a working class that can sustain a family, that can provide, security for all workers. Now, I happen to believe, and I think the record is strong, that happens most robustly when workers are in a union. So supporting the labor movement is actually supporting an economy that works for all workers. Union wages, union members get paid more than non-union workers in similar jobs, in similar industries. But when a union is strong in an industry, it actually raises wages for everybody. So strongly supporting the labor movement is actually a way of supporting all workers. And, I think if you look at the Trump record, you just don't see that commitment to either looking out for the economic interests of union members or non-union members. I mean, you had, in the Trump administration, you had an administration that wanted to roll back overtime protections, that sort of abandon workers during the pandemic. They are running on a platform, and if you look at Project 2025, it is just full of policies that will really hurt working people. I mean, for example, they actually say the quiet part out loud in that report, that they want to roll back child labor protections. How can anybody running on that ticket say that they care about working people if they want to encourage young people to go into dangerous jobs? So, you can say, J.D. Vance can say what he wants to say, but I think if you compare the records of the Biden-Harris administration and then what the Trump administration did last time they were in power and what they've told us they're going to do next time, it's bad news for working people, whether they're in a union or not.
Well, Sharon, the fact of the matter is Kamala Harris is still trailing Donald Trump, and in some cases significantly when it comes to matters of the economy, even in our own Bloomberg swing state poll, which includes Michigan and Wisconsin, where we're finding these two candidates today. When it comes to how do you handle the stock market, who do you trust more when it comes to interest rates, the price of goods, and the price of services? Donald Trump was anywhere from 5 to 7, almost 10 points ahead of Kamala Harris. So what's the message here? Because we're talking about potentially an economic slowdown this week, a stock market that's starting to look wobbly. Does Kamala Harris deserve to carry Joe Biden's economic baggage with her in this campaign?
Well, I think the Biden-Harris administration has a strong record. We all know there are moments of volatility, but I think if you look at the record of this administration over 3.5 years, I think it's a record that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to be very proud to run on. If you look at the number of jobs created, if you look at how much inflation has come down, I mean, just remembering what it was like at the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, the sort of crisis that this country was in, that our economy was in. So I think it's an incredibly strong record that she's going to be proud to run on. And again, you just have to go back and look at how the Trump administration treated working people. I think people don't live the stock market. They live, how much do they get paid? Do they have a job? How are their communities doing? And I think when they look at those kinds of issues, I mean, just on job creation, this administration has a record that is second to none. I think that's when people have to make this decision, that's what's going to be important to them.
Well, in our final moment with you, Sharon, as we talk about job creation, those numbers are going down. We saw a very soft jobs report on Friday and a higher unemployment rate that caused people to throw the word growth scare around. Given your knowledge of the labor market in the U.S., are you worried that things are going to turn in a more material way in these final months leading to November?
I'm really not. I mean, this summer we can see some volatility. Again, we're adding jobs in the last jobs report just last week. And if you look at the average over the past few months, we're still seeing strong job growth. And the uptick in the unemployment rate, I mean, again, we want everybody who wants to have a job to be able to have a job, but you get to an increase in the unemployment rate in two ways, either because people have lost jobs or because more people are coming into the economy looking to have a job who hadn't had one before. That's what we saw in the July job numbers. And that's an important distinction. I think people want to come in to get jobs because they see that this is an economy that has been growing, where people have been getting jobs. And so I think it's way too soon to be talking about a trend that is different than the really strong trend that we've seen throughout the Biden administration on job creation.
Well, we really appreciate a great conversation, Sharon. It's good to have you. Professor of Practice at Harvard Law School, Executive Director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard, former labor advisor to the Biden White House. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.